This is a piece by a guy named Larry Taunton.
Larry who? Never heard of her.
What sort of a man is he?
Pick from Bama.
A man like any other, but more so.
Well, I thought he was dead.
This is the Larry Alex Taunton Show. Let's light this candle.
Welcome to the Larry Alex Taunton Show. I am your host, Amie Beth Shaver. Larry Alex Taunton, your man in the field. That was powered by donuts and a scone.
We've been having a lot of fun this morning, so much so that this is about our fourth take, to begin the show. And our producer, Matt Ruff, is slightly annoyed with our childish behavior. But welcome to the show. Amie Beth, how are you doing?
You know what? I'm great. I have a car without a dent. It has cute new tires, and it's good. First
we
world
just sounded
problems.
like a plane was strafing us just a minute ago.
Matt brought
us, and Matt brought us some Krispy Kreme donuts, which was awesome. And then Lori made some. I was taught scones. Both are acceptable, scone and scone, but I grew up in a very British tradition. My mother's a Canadian, British Columbia. They always said scone, but whatever it is, your preference to say, either or.
It sounds
neither,
fancier when you say scone.
Yeah.
So the question is, how do you say macaroon? Is it macaroon or macaron?
I say yum.
Well played. Well played. Also sugar speaking, and some good coffee your wife just brewed.
Yes, very good.
So how are things this week?
It's been a very good week. I have been very busy first of all, it was Labor Day weekend, and so our house was slammed with all kinds of people. You guys were enjoying a little vacation, a little respite. We were too. I have to say, for my wife, it's not really much of a respite because she's making a lot of food and she's preparing a lot of bedrooms and keeping people happy. I'm busy hosting and just being the big personality who walks around and, doesn't
Are
do
you
anything.
having a good time?
What can my wife get you? But no, it was a great weekend. Really enjoyed it. And as we said last week, football season is here. And I'm looking forward to Alabama absolutely beating the crap out of Texas this weekend. That's what I hope happens. So there we go.
I felt like this was the best arrangement of a Labor Day weekend with the football starting really, I guess there's a Thursday night game. No one pays attention to that. But like Friday and then all day Saturday, it was delightful.
And the games were great.
The games were great.
Notre Dame and Ohio State was a pretty good game through three quarters. Appalachian State in North Carolina.
UNC. Was that not amazing?
It was an insane ball game. It was fun to watch. And those are the most fun because I don't have a dog in the fight. So I don't really care about the outcome. The FSU-LSU game.
Unbelievable game.
Which was insanity. And I'm just sitting, just enjoying all of it. So it was a lot of fun. And I love the fall, where it's not in Alabama where the two of us live. What we would call fall is probably not what someone from the Northeast would call fall, meaning, the temperatures drop into the 80s, so it's cooler weather, but the evenings are getting a little bit cooler.
Nice.
Leaves haven't started to change or anything yet, but it's getting very nice. So yeah, I can't complain. Life is good.
It is very good, and it is exciting. I just found out.
Not in this country, but life is good.
Life is good. Life is good in spite of what is going on in our country. I just found out that a child will pop in for the weekend, which is also delightful because, as you know, when they fly the coop and then they say, "Hey, can I pop in because I have a job starting? I'd like to come in." I'm like, yes. So it'll be a festival of baking and football for us this weekend. So,
good.
So it'll be good.
Yeah, that will be
Our
very...
priorities are straight.
Good. Well, I believe it. I believe you're very organized. I'm sure that you have it all.
We had this whole discussion about women organizing leadership. It's going to be a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, that's a different thing. My wife has to tell me where to be and when to be there. In fact, there was some exchange the two of us had, and I remember telling you remind me and make sure I show up because I may not. So yes, I'm there for all of that.
Well, it's a good time. So we have a great show planned today.
Yes, we do.
We have a guest.
We do.
And I'm very excited about this guest, and not just because presently where he lives is near where I was born, so I'm partial, but I'm excited to hear his perspective. I think he brings a weight to it. And I'm looking forward to that. We're also going to be discussing.
And I'm amazed Joe Biden would agree to appear on our show.
I know. Can you believe it?
It's pretty amazing.
It took a lot of doing.
He won't remember this interview.
He won't. But we're going to do it, and we're going to do it
well.
It
anyway.
Yes,
and so we're
absolutely.
glad. We're
Stay
grateful to the
part.
White House, and that Joe Biden will join us on the show today.
Yeah,
continue. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
No one leave. He doesn't even know he's coming, but he's coming. The other thing we're going to do is really dig into Joe Biden's speech, and maybe he'll go through with it, piece by piece. You wrote a great article. It has gotten great reviews, and I know we won't go, bit by bit through it, but a really good perspective, because I think that's what people are looking for.
About his crazy speech.
About his absolutely crazy pants. I would like to say another descriptor, but I will refrain so that we can stay on our networks, right? It was crazy. And
it looked like he gave it from the bowels of hell.
Yeah.
We're talking about the Independence Hall address that Joe Biden gave a little over a week ago. Well, a week ago today, he gave this speech, and right in front of Independence Hall that is illuminated in blood red hues. And what that speech is all about. Yeah, we're going to talk about that today.
So it'll be very good, and maybe a book, maybe a movie or two. But it's chock full of goodness today. And that's not just because your wife made delicious lemon scones or because we ate donuts. Okay? So get yourself together. Stick around. We have a fantastic show for you. We'll be right back.
This is the Larry Alex Taunton Show.
Larry is my favorite player.
Welcome back. We would like to welcome our guest, John
Rushemeza.
How are you, John?
I am doing good.
Yeah?
John is a guy that first of all, John, you bear a striking resemblance to Joe Biden.
I don't agree with that.
You don't think so?
I don't think so.
Now, make sure you're speaking up, John, so that our audience can hear you. You agree with that, or you don't agree with that?
I do not agree with that.
Okay.
No.
Who do you think you look like?
I believe I look more like Joe Biden's boss, Barack Obama.
So you think he's the guy he's the puppet master. He's the guy pulling the strings.
Yes. I forgot to say his middle name, Barack Hussein Obama.
Yeah, well, that's significant.
It is significant.
It is significant. John is a guy that I asked to come on to the show because I've gotten to know John just a little bit on social media. John's come to one of our events, understanding what's happening in America. You came to last year in Birmingham, Alabama, and got to hear all the wonderful speakers that we had for that event. But I don't know what you're going to say on this show. Now, I do reserve the right to not air this show if you say things that I don't like, so I can't actually, throw this into the editing trash can. But my sense is, John, is that you love this country. And I'm curious, having traveled a ton myself, we encounter so many people in this country. I think you told me you're 37 years old.
Yes.
You are, I thought I had this thing turned off, and clearly I don't. It's a viewer who says, ask John if he's married.
I am.
You are married. And your wife, now you're from Rwanda.
Yes.
Came to this country at age 20.
Yes, sir.
And your wife, she's born and raised in this country, in the United States.
Yes. My wife, Shanice Rushemeza, she actually is Hispanic by ethnicity. She's Puerto Rican, and she was born and raised in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania.
Okay. Well, then you need to shave the mustache, John, so that you will fit in among the Amish there. Yeah. You look very Amish. So if you were to
obviously,
and do you use a horse and buggy?
No, but I do tell people that I'm Black Amish. I do say that.
Yes. Does it work?
Sometimes, there was this show, the Amish Mafia, and they had the black guy in there. So sometimes it works.
This show.
Well,
Okay, I need to see that.
So is this
show.
on Netflix or something?
I don't know where it is, but it aired on TV for, I think, maybe like 3 seasons or something like that.
Is it true that the Amish, and this is a serious question, I am seeing on Twitter more and more video that suggests the Amish are starting to actually get fairly politically engaged. Like I saw, for instance, just today, a number in Lancaster County, a number of horse and buggies that were, had Trump flags and things like this. Is this a myth, or is this actually happening?
No, it's true. It's true, and it started with Trump in 2016. They came out heavy for Trump. So, yeah, it's true. They're coming out heavy now for the governor, Doug, I think, Mastriano. So it is true.
Well, what we'd really like to talk with you about today on this show, and stop fooling with that. You see, it's very distracting for people who are who are watching. John, you have to learn the rules of television. You can't be doing. It's funny. My wife says to me all the time that I fidget constantly. She says, Amie Beth is sitting. So look at her right now. She has the the beauty queen posture. I'm sure if you looked under the table, you'd see her legs are at the perfect angle. And I'm moving all over the place. I'm scratching. Doing. I would spit if I had a spittoon over here. So we'll allow some of that, John. But you can't be doing too much here with your hands to distract people. I'm interested in knowing your perspective on this country, because we have in this country a lot of young people. You're a millennial, but Gen Zers, who are just right behind you, Gen Zers and millennials, many of whom, by no means all, my children don't think this. I don't think Amie Beth's children think this. If they do, smack them. But who really think life in this country is really hard, and they view themselves as victims. Let's talk a little bit about your experience first in Rwanda and then coming to the United States. Tell us a little bit about life in Rwanda, life in Africa.
Well, I was born in Kigali, Rwanda, 1985. In 1994, obviously, most people know that the war started, and my family and I left the country, and from that point on, we grew up as refugees. I was fortunate because my parents were educated, so they kind of protected us from a lot of the things that illiterate people would be exposed to, like living actually physically in refugee camps and things like that. My parents were resourceful. They kind of used their gifts to put food on the table legally. But we still lived in poor, in the slums of everywhere that we lived. And we
always in Rwanda, or were you in Congo, Uganda, somewhere else?
Well,
post-war.
In 1994, we left Rwanda for political reasons. We couldn't stay. So we lived in Congo for a year. And then from there, we moved to Zambia, in Lusaka, Zambia, where we lived pretty much the rest of the time of our time in Africa, which was a total of about 10 years. And then in 2005, we came to the United States under a refugee status. So we came here as
your whole family.
Yeah. We resettled to the United States as refugees in 2005.
Now, let's back up just a bit. Enlighten people as to what was going on in Rwanda. What was taking place there for you to be driven out of the country and then eventually come to the United States?
Well, in Rwanda, the war started between the Hutus and the Tutsis, primarily not regular average people. It was a political war between leaders on this side and leaders on that side. It was sparked up largely by the president getting assassinated. The president at the time
I like the way you put that. Got assassinated. Makes it sound like it was his fault. Did he put himself in the line of fire? What happened there?
He was coming back from signing a peace treaty with the now president and their government, and his plane got shot from the air. Got shut down. The debate is who did it. But whatever the case may be, that's what sparked up the conflict.
Okay. And so did you have to leave everything behind?
Yes, we had to take everything we could carry. We had to take pretty much just clothes and whatever we could carry and left everything. We left our house. My father had recently built a house from ground up. We left all that behind. And
so you apply to enter the United States. George W. Bush would have been president of the United States at the time in 2005.
Yes.
And so you come to the United States. How do you end up in Pennsylvania, and of all places, Lancaster County?
Well, going back, actually, we applied to come to the United States probably five or 6 years prior.
Okay.
And
so
waited,
99, 2000, somewhere in there.
Right. And waited all this time. Maybe 4 years into it is when we heard back that we were accepted. In the process of then getting prepared, it's a whole thing where they prepare you to come to the United States.
So you didn't come across the southern border. You didn't walk across the Rio Grande.
No, it did not. No, it did not.
When you say they prepare you, what do they do to prepare you?
We had to take classes called cultural orientation classes.
What do those look like?
They teach you a lot of things, and one of the funny things they taught us was how to plastic smile. In America...
How to plastic smile?
Yes.
Tell us about that. Let's see your plastic smile. So they were telling you that Americans are fake and you need to...
I mean, we didn't think so at the time. They were presenting it as that's how you politely, I guess, acknowledge other people. But now that looking back now, I see that it was pretty much teaching us to be fake, which I don't do. As you can see, I haven't practiced my plastic smile in a long time.
I thought it was marvelous.
Anyway, so they taught us, the statistics of how many black people are in prison, as opposed to how many are actually in, not locked up. All these left-wing things, almost discouraging us or warning us. That's what the class was pretty much about.
So it wasn't about the Constitution or the Federalist Papers or the Pledge of Allegiance or learning the history of the country. It didn't involve those things.
No.
Interesting.
We didn't get all that. We only they told us what we should expect on the ground when we get here. The kind of people, the how many percentage of whites as opposed to blacks, as opposed to Hispanics, kind of, I guess what they were trying to prepare us for is when we watch CNN to understand what CNN is talking about.
Okay. So you arrive in this country. Did it meet with those expectations, or what did you find? What were your impressions of the United States when you first arrived here?
Well, first of all, the only thing I had to compare to the United States was movies. And so I always had this picture of, everything was perfect here.
Well, let's first ask what movies you watched.
I guess.
Were you a big Baywatch fan? Desperate Housewives? I mean, what were you watching?
Mostly I watched music videos, hip hop music videos.
Okay.
So I thought
I'm picturing this. Okay.
Yes, I thought it was. There was one area that was the project, and then the rest of the country was pretty much nice roads and the American dream.
So, is that what you found?
First of all, we moved to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is not that big of a city. So a lot of my expectations were quickly reimagined because I realized that some of the things I saw in movies were kind of unrealistic. Some of my understandings of what on the ground, what people look like, and even the plastic smile. I did realize that some people do have a plastic smile, though. I did see that. But a lot of it was things that I got to realize that people are people everywhere you go. There's really not that much of a difference among people. And I also found that Americans are a lot of times welcoming and kind. And that's every American, whites, blacks, Hispanics, all of them.
So, what are your impressions of America now? What are your thoughts on America these days? You've been in this country now for 17 years, right?
Yes.
And so you've been here for almost 2 decades. Have you traveled much of the country? Have you seen much of it?
I would like to think so. I haven't been to all the states yet, but I have been to California. I've been to Massachusetts, Vermont, North Carolina, South Carolina,
Alabama,
New York City, Alabama twice.
Yeah, God's country.
Okay then.
Have you been to Texas? You know, the other side of your hat says Texas.
Yes, I have been to Texas, and I love it. Not as much as I love Alabama.
Of course not.
So, yes, I have been around, and I love it. I don't think it's racist as people tend to present it as on the internet. I think the United States, in my view, is the land flowing with milk and honey, to be honest. And
Yeah.
I'm not trying to say this because I'm on here. I truly believe this. When I look back to where I came from, I grew up in the slums of Lusaka. And when I look back, I remember everyone that I ever met up until that point always wanted to go to America. They could settle for France. They could settle for the United Kingdoms. They could settle for even China. But if you ask them what's their top, if they had to choose, it's America. Everyone wants to go to America.
Amie Beth?
So if they wanted to go to America, what were they looking for when they got there?
Her question is going to be harder than mine.
Well,
They're devious too, so watch out.
I'll say America is the land of opportunity. Mm-hmm. You know, everyone that goes to America, it's like, you know, sending somebody to college. Mm-hmm. You know, somebody's going to college so they could do better. Mm-hmm. And as a result, they will help the rest of the family. There will be an anchor for the rest of the family. So the best place that is possible faster, mm-hmm. if you work hard and if you apply yourself, is the United States of America.
So what would you say to the millennials who, or the younger generation that, as Larry referenced a minute ago, they think it's so hard? What was it actually like when you say a slum, and you grew up, and I've only briefly visited the Congo, but what did the slum look like so that people can have a perspective on what that actually means versus where you are today?
Well, there's no paved roads anywhere near. There's no running water. We all have to gather only at certain times. The water is not running 24/7. We have to all gather at a certain place that has a tap of water. and get our water that will last us until tomorrow or the next day. When I was growing up, I remember, and this was in the early 2000s, late 90s, only one person in the entire neighborhood had the TV, and it was black and white. We used to go watch Mike Tyson fight on that TV. And, you know, the houses are not as your normal, typical house here, even in the projects. You know, I've been to the projects in all these, but I've been to the projects in North Carolina, in New York City, and in my own town and in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. And none of it is even anywhere remotely close to the slums. Most houses have holes in them, and most
You're
houses...
talking about in Africa.
In Lusaka, Zambia.
Comparing the projects in the United States to those in Rwanda, you're saying that the projects are quite nice.
The projects are great. I mean, it's not even a comparison, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Anybody that wants to compare life here in terms of hardship to anywhere in the world needs to travel a little more. And when you travel, you have to avoid the traveler's fallacy. If you want to know what that is about, talk to Larry one of these days. The traveler's fallacy, where you go and stay in a resort somewhere and assume that you know what to know about that place. If you really want to know hardship, abandon everything. Well, don't do that, because you won't survive. Right. The water alone will kill you.
Right.
Because it's not
you can't drink
safe.
Yeah.
For someone whose stomach is used to being in the United States where everything is treated and is, you're not going to survive just from drinking water alone. So hardship is not I don't even know why people say people need to travel more. That I always chalk that to ignorance.
Mm-hmm. It's powerful. So you brought something interesting with you, and that is the oath of allegiance. What is that?
Well, I wanted to kind of remember, as I talk about why I love the United States of America, I always carry this with me because I want to remember what it means to be an American and why it's a gift that most people will kill for. You know, the people that are crossing the border, you know, whatever you think about immigration, and I believe we should protect our borders. I believe it's not
so as an immigrant, you're not of you're not of the opinion that just everybody should be allowed into the country.
That's not realistic.
Of course not.
I mean the reason we have borders anywhere is not just because we want to hinder everyone from the American dream. It's because if everyone is allowed to come in, there won't be an American dream to speak of. Mm-hmm. So allowing people to just keep coming in is going to take away the American dream. So why would I want everybody to just keep coming in?
Yeah, I liken it to this. You don't just let anybody in the front door of your house, and you can't just let anybody in the front door of your country. And there needs to be some standard of like-mindedness, I think, is really is what the intention always was. It's interesting because you were talking about the classes that you took. And those classes used to be classes where you learned the history of the country, where you were required to learn something about the founding documents, the Articles of Confederation, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, to learn them. In fact, there was a time where immigrants to this country knew the history of this country and its founding documents better than many citizens did, because the courses were quite demanding. And that it was a big moment when you took that oath, to become a citizen in this country, because you knew what it meant and you knew the price that was paid for it. And immigrants were people who were often more American, more proudly American than were many people who'd been in this country, their families generationally. And so in a similar way, letting people into this country, you would like to think that there's some standard. Look, if you can't say we hold these truths to be self-evident, you don't belong here. You don't belong here. And yet, in spite of the, as you described it, leftist, indoctrination you were receiving in those classes, you're proud to be an American, aren't you?
I'm very proud to be an American. And let me say one thing. I did learn the history and all these things.
Good.
When I was getting ready to go get my citizenship.
Did you do that exactly 7 years after? Or did it take longer? Your naturalization, you came to the country, you immigrated to the country in 2005. When did you become a citizen?
Well, my story is a little bit different because when I came here, I made some poor decisions and hang out with the wrong crowd for a good number of years. So that made it harder I had some things on my record that made it harder to get approved for citizenship. So believe it or not, I got approved for citizenship in 2019.
So not terribly long ago. And is it fair to say, what were the big influences on your life to make the John Rushemeza that I know?
Well, my biggest influence, I guess, is my mom. She's passed away. She never made it to the United States, but she was the big influence in terms of spiritual influence. My mom was a pastor's kid. My grandfather was a pastor. And so I went to church against my will, but I'm thankful for that now. And so she was my big influence that she imparted in me the things that helped me even in my darkest moments to kind of always know where to run to when the time came. And so even being, I guess, a conservative, I think that's something that most Africans have just from kind of how we're raised up. But I always thank my mother for that. She was really, and still is, a huge influence on me and how I think and how I look at life in general.
We'll have to take a break, and then we'll come back and we'll wrap up. We'll be right back.
This is the Larry Alex Taunton Show.
Larry is my favorite player.
Welcome back. So, John, let's pick up where we left off. You were talking about your influence and your mother. Tell us more about that.
Well, like I said, my mother was a pastor's kid. My grandfather was a pastor. Fun fact is that my grandfather is actually one of the pioneers of the Protestant church in Kigali, Rwanda. And so my mom grew up in church, and she was a devout Christian woman. And so I was introduced to the scriptures and to just God and all that comes with that from a very young age. And up until my mom died, I really didn't have a choice. I had to go to church.
And you said a minute ago, you're glad you did.
Yes.
Right? So when did those lessons come back, and when did the Holy Spirit begin to nudge you in that direction?
Well, so at the same time that my mom was trying to help me, guide me in the way I should go, I also, being a millennial, I was attracted to hip hop. And I wanted to be a rapper.
We might give you an opportunity to do a little demonstration on here for us. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, not after I tell you this next part of the story. I wanted to be a rapper, and I would write my rhymes, and my mom would find the rhymes, and she would just throw it in the trash. because she didn't want me to do that. She didn't think that was right.
Was hip hop, was that something you were introduced to in the United States, or were you already into hip hop? You know, because it's interesting in Africa. This is shocking to most Americans. Country music is huge in Africa. You know, I arrive at the airport in Nigeria, and I'm listening to old Hank Williams on the loudspeakers. I'm hearing Johnny Cash. My driver throughout Nigeria was a huge Rascal Flatts fan. So country music, shocking to many Americans, is huge in Africa. So my question: hip hop there, or did you get introduced to it here?
Hip hop there. Remember, my mother never made it to the United States.
That's true.
Right. So hip hop there. Tupac, Snoop Dogg. Those were my idols. And so, anyway, my mom kind of slowly killed my potential.
She said no. She gave it the block. As mothers do.
Slowly and secretly killed it. And between me and she, I mean, now that I look back, I know what she was doing. And I'm thankful for it, to be honest with you, because I think that if I had really invested a whole lot more than what I did in that life, I would have been probably in a lot more trouble than I was. And I got in a lot of trouble.
Well, was it with other immigrants that you got into trouble with, or was it, with other Americans in this country? Or both?
Well, when I came to the United States when I was 20, I was already lost. My biggest problem was alcohol. And so I went to the streets and did all the street lifestyle to provide for my alcohol and drinking habit. But Africans would actually tell their children to stay away from me. So most of my friends and the people that I call them associates, that I associated with here in the United States in my life of crime were not Africans. They were not immigrants. They were all Americans. Had to say it, mostly African Americans.
This is interesting, and I'm curious as to your reaction to this. I was talking to a friend of mine here. He's a black business owner, and he was telling me that some years ago he was teaching a course to African and Caribbean immigrants to this country. And he said, I thought this was fascinating, he said they wanted nothing to do with me personally. He said they didn't identify with the black narrative in the United States at all. And he said, he's a black conservative, but he said they automatically assumed that I had a victim mentality. And he said they took the position, we need to learn from you what we have to learn to pass this course, but keep everything else over in your lane. And he said, and it took me a long time to build. He says these were Haitians, Jamaicans, I think some Africans. He said it took me some time to build relationships with them because they didn't want anything to do with me as a black American. Is there truth to that narrative?
Yeah, there's a lot of truth to it. And I think in part it's because of that cultural orientation class. Like I said, one of the things they told us in that class were that most criminals, pretty much, when you start saying that most people that are in prison are black, that's what you're implying.
Yeah, okay.
So people don't want to associate with criminals. Africans, in my position, I didn't care, but most people that want to become a citizen at some point, they want to keep a record that doesn't have that kind of blemish, if you will.
Gotcha. So they're trying to they're trying to obey the laws. They're trying to take advantage of the American dream, and they're thinking that association is not going to be helpful to me. And they're of that view because that class has kind of inculcated them with that kind of idea.
Right. Well, that's one of the reasons. But also remember, my mother was killing a lifestyle, the hip hop lifestyle.
Yeah.
So there's a culture that comes with that too that is immoral, and most Africans don't want to associate with that. Most other Africans now, people like that are my age, 30s, that come here, they don't really have as much a bad, I guess, bad thoughts as the older generation did. And it all has to do with the internet now. Everything is everywhere. It's not as hard to get trained in that kind of mindset as it was for people like my mom, who only knew that this is bad and we're not going to even allow any inch of it in this house.
What about your father? What was his influence?
My father is an intellectual, and
you said he was educated. What does he do for a living?
Well, my
father
was in education. He was actually well placed in the government. He worked for the government of education. When we left, he was the minister of education, and my dad was like the second in charge.
Okay. Gotcha.
Which is in part why we left and couldn't go back. And to this day, he probably couldn't go back because he's not on a good list there.
Yeah.
He's on the bad list. But my dad was an intellectual. He's an economist by trade. He couldn't really do much in the United States with that because he was trained in France. His whole training is, he would have to kind of go to school all over again and,
to receive accreditation here.
Yeah.
And let me just tell you, the French economy is in absolute shambles. So whatever they're teaching people over there about the economy, it's not working. But anyway, continue.
I will say that my father, having had some recent very good talks with him, after being estranged for a long time, I was surprised to find out that my dad is a free market economist.
Okay.
And he voted for Trump.
Okay.
Very good. When did you become a believer? Or did you become a believer young and then, go off the rails and then come back? Tell us a little bit of your faith journey.
Yes. So my mom did the best she could to expose me to the faith. I think I was kind of participated to appease her, but some of it stuck, I believe, because it guided me through my life. Even as a criminal, there were places I couldn't go because I knew that was a little too far. But I'll say in 2017, when I was kind of at the end of the road, at the end of myself, is when I really made a decision to turn around. People had always reached out to me. They, always exposed the gospel to me. And growing up in Africa, I knew about God, and I knew that the good life is really surrendering to God. I knew that, and I ran away from that. So I always looked at myself as kind of a prodigal son. And so I just knew that I had to go back home. I knew in the Christian community, under Christ's lordship, was where I would be safe. So I decided to check myself into a program there in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, a Christian program. I knew that I needed a Christian structure to help me to get out of my mess. So I went, checked myself in, and kind of officially gave my life to Christ, or surrendered to Christ's lordship at that point, and this was in 2017, 2000 and well, actually no, that's further back. I officially turned around in 2011, and I haven't looked back since.
So, speeding forward, this moment when you became a citizen, because now you're a citizen of heaven, so your eternity is secure. You are becoming a citizen of this country. What was that like?
So when I officially gave my life, surrendered back to Christ, I then knew that I have to start pursuing becoming a citizen of the United States, because that was always a dream of mine. And like I said, I went to the streets, hanged out with the kind of negative influence for as long as I did, and I guess I didn't care much about becoming a citizen at that point. But that was always a desire of mine. I didn't want to be deported. So I started pursuing the dream of becoming a citizen of the United States. I applied, and the process up until then took maybe like 3 years in total. I'll never forget when I received the letter saying I've been approved, and now I have to go and take the test that Larry was talking about earlier. And I had to study for the test. At that point, I had been in the United States for almost 10 years. So I knew a lot of the history and the things kind of that you need to know to get by in that test. It wasn't as hard as I thought. But they give you a list of questions, potential questions that you can you can study, and it's. I always encourage Americans to attend that ceremony. Mm-hmm. That's one of the best. I mean, it's humbling. Yeah, you should. If you have some friends that are planning to become citizens, it's humbling. I think one thing that upsets me is when I see people demonizing this country, because I always look back to that ceremony and a group of people from all over the world. It was about, I'll say when I did it, it was about 30 of us from all over the world. Asians, blacks, whites, all colors, kind of almost like what heaven will look like. And we all raised our hands and pledged, allegiance to this country. And we meant it, and we're proud of it. Well, I think we all did. And it was just a proud moment, mm-hmm. of kind of, you made it. You know what I'm saying? You're safe now. Mm-hmm. You're an American. It's something that I don't understand why people. I guess I always look at it as, when people are rich and they just don't understand what they have.
Yes.
They don't understand the value of what you have, because a lot of times they don't have anything else to compare it to. But it's just, I don't even know how to explain it. It is.
We'll put this up on the screen for others to see at some point. But this is wonderful. The Oath of Allegiance, and then it has on the back the words, the lyrics to the Star Spangled Banner, and the pledge of allegiance. I'm reminded as you're talking, John, when we were adopting our daughter Sasha, according to U.S. law, the moment those wheels touch ground in the United States, she became a U.S. citizen. And in the process of bringing her home, our thought process was we want to get her out of the country. And we had a layover in Paris. And Sasha at this point is traveling on a Ukrainian passport. So it's Lori and two of my three boys, Christopher and Zachary, myself, and Sasha. So Sasha with her Ukrainian passport and the four of us with U.S. passports. So we come to, we have an overnight stay in Paris. And we come to the passport counter in Charles de Gaulle Airport, and they say that the four of us can enter the country, but she cannot.
Oh.
And it's because a Ukrainian passport's just a you know this, it's a not just simply third world, it's a third class passport. And they would say, you know, Americans can come in, but she cannot. And we said, well, there's a problem. She's 10, and we've just adopted her. Can you please let her in? And they said, by law, she cannot come into this country. But thank God, you seldom can expect this from government, much less French government. But this particular passport control guy realized this is unreasonable. We're not just letting somebody who's just going to take off and, you know, disappear into our country and become a burden to the welfare state. He disappears and he goes and talks to his boss, and then you see a whole crowd of these immigration officials all talking with each other. And it's hard for me to say this without getting emotional. They come back with a form they've signed, and they say it's a 24-hour visa to enter the country, and they give it to us, and they say, welcome to Paris.
Oh, wow.
And so we drove around. I rented a taxi, a minivan taxi, and we drove through Paris that night. Beautiful evening. There's the Champs-Élysées. There's the Eiffel Tower. There's the Arc de Triomphe, and so on. But then the next day we boarded a plane and we arrive in Atlanta, and Sasha is doing cartwheels, quite literally, at baggage claim. And I was talking to the U.S. immigration official, and he said, you know, you would think that she knows that she's now a U.S. citizen. And it was so powerful. It was so powerful because there was this feeling she now has a level of protection she's never had. She has now become a citizen of this country. We can toss that Ukrainian passport. She's safe. She has the same protections of anyone else in this country. Did you feel emotional the moment you became a citizen of the United States?
Well, for me, it was surreal because like I said, I had done so much to try to jeopardize that. But, you know, nobody else knew that except me. But looking across the room to all these other people, we all felt the same way. It's a gift that is not afforded to a lot of our own people from wherever every one of those people came from. It's not a gift that is afforded to everyone. Mm-hmm. When your number comes up, you know, whether it's by lottery or however way you go about it, it's a gift that for the life of me, I fail to understand why anybody would demonize, will act like, well, I feel sorry for people who don't understand what others have to go through to become a United States citizen.
Yeah. Yeah, oftentimes Americans themselves are not as appreciative of their own citizenship. And I agree with you. I think I may make a point to go to one of these ceremonies just to remind me of how fortunate I am to be a citizen of this country.
John, thank you so much for sharing your story today. It's very compelling and very convicting. And I think I, too, would like to go and watch a ceremony and just be there. So thank you. Stay tuned. We will be right back. Welcome back. So teeing off of our last and very important conversation is the whole idea, the whole conversation surrounding Joe Biden's speech, who clearly hasn't ever suffered in his life. And I don't know. And I know we talked about being triggered by his speech, but there were some elements that were behind that speech.
Yeah. Yeah, this actually works quite well with our previous conversation with John and his perspective on this country, and that he loves this country, and that he recognized when he came here that he was, to use his words, jeopardizing his opportunities to become a citizen in this country by his behavior. Mm-hmm. So John wanted to really alter his behavior in such a way that he could become a citizen here because he loved this country. Contrast that with a presidential speech where he indicts roughly 85 million Americans. Now, in a speech a few days prior to this one, and again, we're talking about Joe Biden's speech at Independence Hall, where the hall itself behind him is underlit in this hellish red. You see him flanked by Marines who are like, none of their features are distinguishable except for their white-gloved hands. Yes. They look like white-gloved demons in the background. And you have this image of him, shaking his fists in Hitlerian fashion. And I want to be really clear in saying this. I could find for you an interview I did just a couple of years ago with Jimmy Barrett in Houston. He's got a big show there, and where you have people calling each other Hitler and fascist and this kind of thing. And in that interview with Jimmy Barrett, I said, hold on just a second. We still have, and I say it's been 2 years ago. It's probably been about 3. It was pre-pandemic. And I was saying, look, we still have the rule of law in this country. Nobody is Hitler. Nobody is fascist. We're not seeing that. That's not what's happening. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now. Mm-hmm. This is what we are seeing now. And one of the things that we'll be discussing on this show, I don't know if it's in the next show or in the one after that, because I'm having to spend a lot of time thinking on this, and I'm trying to navigate the course, how to say this in a way that makes sense to the average reader, and it's a listener as well. And that is, what is fascism? What is Marxism? And how is it that we're seeing both in this country? And how does it relate to the policies in this country, to Klaus Schwab, who we're going to be talking about, and the World Economic Forum? Because I promise you, they all relate. This is all very real. I don't have it, sitting on the table today, but you have people who will say, well, the Great Reset, that's a conspiracy theory. Well, if I had the book, I would hold it up for you that says The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab, meaning it's not a conspiracy theory. It is a real thing that the media is not talking about, and that they are moving in this direction. And this speech was very much, I think, one of the dots along the roadmap, the leftist roadmap that's moving us in that globalist direction, because it's necessary to destroy patriotism. Patriotism is the enemy of globalism, as is the Christian faith, the rights of the individual, the dignity of the individual. That has to be destroyed. And the way they want to destroy it is under the acids of cynicism. It's just to simply point out, any failures in any kind of nationalism, in any kind of individuality, the way they do, for instance, with guns. We have the recent shooting in Memphis, therefore the solution must be to round up all the guns. Well, I could just as easily say this presupposes that the government, who alone would then have the key to the gun safe, that governments can be trusted with guns. Need I point you to, say, Wounded Knee? Need I point you to Babin Yar? Need I point you to the Holocaust? Need I point you to the Stalinist purges, to modern China, North Korea? the idea that governments alone can be trusted to have our best interests in mind is a historical absurdity. I mean, it's absolutely laughable. So when I think about this speech of Biden condemning not just a few Americans, not the shooter in Memphis, not some evil individual, but that he's calling roughly 85 million Americans semi-fascist. I find that highly problematic.
And I think that the way that we got here was during COVID. And I think it snuck up on us where 3 years ago you can say it's not here. And now you look upon your neighbor, especially during COVID, well, were they wearing a mask? Were they sick? They were a human germ. You began to, be suspicious of everybody. So here we have a president who's just casting blame on 81 million Americans. And you're like, well, maybe he's right. I mean, you have that little nugget of doubt that was planted, that seed, and it's grown. And it's frankly terrifying that we are where we are.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm reading a great old book, The Death of America, or The Death of the West, by Pat Buchanan. And one of the things... I
saw it sitting around here a minute ago.
I dropped it on the ground because I had it in my lap. There were so many good points in it, but one of the things they talked about was snatching away our memory. And I think that's the other part of what's happening is we cannot forget what historically has happened over time when they come in and they say, well, we'll take your guns.
Yeah.
That'll be enough. Because I think that reference to the guns in the speech, you think that's all you'll need to defeat your government is your gun, struck a deep and terrifying nerve within me when he brought that up, because I think you're exactly right. We have to look at history to remember what happens when we say, okay, here, you can have them. We trust you, government. Father government, we trust you. It never ends well.
No, it doesn't. It's interesting to me that I think, 12 books of the Old Testament are histories, and that the Lord commanded Israel to commemorate their history, that there were ceremonies that were all about remembering their history. The Passover, the celebration of their deliverance from Egypt. In a sense, this is what communion is. We're remembering the blood that was shed for us, for our salvation. Well, what is true in a spiritual sense is also true in the life of a people and a nation in terms of remembering past wickedness, wrongs, things that they've triumphed over and overcome, past victories, heroes in the life of a nation. And so I think your point that the obliteration of memory, the obliteration of the past, and the rewriting of it. This is what we're seeing, the toppling of statues, the destruction of a past, again, with a cynical retelling. And I want to just put some emphasis on this for our viewers, because when we're talking about any individual, I don't care who you choose to name, we can retell their stories, your story, my story, by stringing together failures and using facts. As I say, I see this all the time as a writer, where facts are used to string together a false narrative. In other words, I could tell your story in such a way that I use factual events, this happened, this happened, this happened, but where my overarching story is false, where I'm retelling it in the blackest light possible. That's what has happened, what is happening right now with the history of our country. And it is what is happening. And I want to be clear, by the way, I don't worship at the altar of the United States. I don't believe heaven will be lined with American flags. I don't believe that. But I do believe that this country, which was founded on largely, not exclusively, the Enlightenment is a mixed bag, but the French Enlightenment was aggressively atheistic, while the English Enlightenment was very Christian. And we were founded chiefly, not exclusively, but chiefly on English Enlightenment principles that have their foundation in a Judeo-Christian worldview, so that even those founding fathers who are not themselves Christians, like, say, for instance, Benjamin Franklin or Thomas Jefferson, they were heavily, heavily influenced by those Judeo-Christian principles and ideas. And so I believe that this country is worth preserving because I recognize that millions, untold millions, hundreds of millions of lives are at stake when we're talking about this. And it matters to me that my children grow up, and my grandchildren, and God willing, one day, great-grandchildren should grow up in a country where there is religious freedom, where they have freedom to be what they would be, for better or for worse, that the choices are theirs, that they make. That is not the direction the Biden administration wants us to go. And ladies and gentlemen, if you believe that Christians should not engage in politics, what you are effectively saying is that the Bible, our God, our Lord, has nothing relevant to say about that sphere of human activity. And when we are talking about literally millions of lives that are at stake, let's just take abortion. Let's just take the sexualization of children. Does God have something to say about that? I think he does. And I think it's cowardly to sit on the sideline and do nothing about it.
You can just keep on preaching about that, because I think right now in culture, you do find, especially as people are engaging in politics locally and then on a national level, you do have pastors even saying, well, you shouldn't be involved in that.
Yeah, and they're usually the most political people.
We are just going to heaven, and you don't need to worry about that. This world is not our home. And you're like, really? Yeah. Have you read the Bible? Do you know what was happening then? Do you realize that even as Jesus was born, oh my goodness, I'm going to talk about the New Testament, that they had to register with the census. They knew who was within their city walls. So this idea that we don't need to be involved is ridiculous. Or if we can't travel anywhere, that also means in those mission trips that people like to take, they're not going to be free to go there as well. So there's so many things that will go away if we choose to sit on the sidelines instead of taking God and his word as his word is living and active and sharper than any double-edged sword. It is quite relevant, and it is the universal thread through time and history that binds his people together. So we've got to be on the front lines. But you said something really important, and this was earlier in the show, and I want to go back to it. And even though I said that I was triggered when I was listening to the speech, you made a point that was his point in part.
Yes,
was to
I believe so.
Trigger people. And I want to talk about that because I loved in your article how you tied in the night, and I'm going to say the city wrong in Germany, Reichstag. How do you say that?
The Reichstag.
Okay. I knew you'd know how to say that. You tied that in.
I'm sure a German would say to me, no, it's Reichstag.
Which is exactly how we just said it.
Would tell me that I'm saying it wrong, but let's just say this is the anglicized version, yeah.
Okay, so the anglicized version, and so tying the triggering and wanting to trigger us, but also looking back to history so that we do not forget that was also a triggering incident that they used to take over power.
Yeah.
So I wondered if you could kind of tie those together.
Well, let's go back to something you said earlier about because I think you're right that the pandemic has been used as a way to sort of start ushering a lot of this stuff in. Well, interestingly enough, I don't know who Klaus Schwab's Karl Rove is, that his policy advisor, but somebody needs to be saying to him as he's speaking on these videos, you probably shouldn't say that. But I'm glad that he is, because Klaus Schwab has said with that heavily German accented,
super creepy, almost cartoonish.
Yes, you picture him petting a cat. Petting a cat and saying, the Great Reset, we'll take over the world. I mean, what is more creepy than the World Economic Forum's slogan, you will have nothing and you will be happy.
Can you just finish with this, with that?
That would be
great.
Perfect. That would be perfect. It is really creepy stuff. But one of the things that he said is to admit that your assertion is true. He is a student of history. And Schwab says that during most crises, national crises, the power of government is exponentially increased. And he says that we must not lose this moment. We must seize that power in order to move the world in a more scientific, it's always scientific, in a more scientific and humane, direction. This is, of course, is the claim. So that's precisely, what they're endeavoring to do. Now, as for the speech itself, I think that I think it was Sam Harris. Sam Harris is one of the so-called four horsemen of the new atheism, along with, the late Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett, who I've debated, Richard Dawkins, who I've debated, and Harris himself. And he was a cognitive scientist, I believe, at Stanford University. And I'm always reassured when an atheist, steps in to pronounce on morality. And Harris, stepped in on Twitter, and he was getting a gazillion retweets where he was saying, look, he had the picture of Biden with, as I say, the hellish blood red, background, saying this is a gaffe. This is a gaffe by Biden. And then he goes on to basically, still, blame Trump, in some way, which is weird. But Democrats knew this was very carefully choreographed. I agree. This is not a gaffe. The president of the United States, a gaffe is where, instead of calling you, Amie Beth Shaver, I say Amie Beth Smith. I mean, that's a gaffe. This is carefully orchestrated. They would have practiced this a number of times. They would have had a dry run on this and lit up the Capitol a number of times. It wasn't just a single colorblind person like myself, who was in charge of this, in which case they might have said it was a gaffe because Larry didn't know it was blood red. But I mean,
he thought it was orange.
That's right. Which would probably be true. There would be dozens, if not hundreds of people who would be commenting on this and say, move this light there, have the Marines stand here like this. Oh, yes, got it. So they knew exactly what they're doing, but they also knew that their own side, that is to say, other leftists, other Democrats, are so ideologically bought in that they could get away with it because the Harrises of the world would say, just a gaffe, a mistake. But they also knew that the setting, the hallowed ground where they were, where the Declaration, was signed,
I mean, just behind the door where he was standing. Goodness.
That he's standing on that hallowed ground that he knows lefties don't value at all, but that Republicans do, conservative Americans do. He's standing on that ground, the blood red background, and he's shaking his fist in Hitlerian fashion, meaning, it's a startling parallel. Yes. With, if you pull up images of Hitler's speeches and then you see Biden there. By that, I don't mean he's Hitler. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that it has that same megalomaniacal, frightening kind of look, so that you had Jews who were tweeting, this speech terrifies me, because we have a very embedded memory of another guy who gave speech like this. So it wasn't just me saying this. These were Jews who were also expressing alarm over a speech like this. So I think they knew their own side was so bought in that they could get away with it. And they also knew that this setting, this coloring, this gesturing would trigger people like you who would say, oh my gosh, what is going on here? What is up with this? And see, I maintain that the speech is an effort to spark a violent response from somebody wearing a MAGA hat, that they can say, aha, see, these people are dangerous. They need to be eradicated. And my point in the article that you're referring to, which you can find on my website at LarryAlexTaunton.com, you just go there to the Full Fathom 5 blog and you'll find it. My argument is that they are doing their best to provoke.
Yes.
I'm just going to keep provoking you until you strike out. And then, here's a good example. if you watch any football, they often say that the guy who hits second is the one who's flagged. So that you have a guy who just keeps provoking another guy until that guy lashes out with a haymaker, and then the flag is thrown and he gets thrown from the game. When you didn't know that the other guy has been doing this all along. I think that's what we've got going on. I think they're trying to provoke a violent response so that they can seize guns, so that they can round people up, mass arrests, you name it. And in the historical examples that I used, the Reichstag fire, 1933, very famous. The Reichstag fire, if you're not familiar with it, it's like the Reichstag is like Capitol Hill. And the Nazis arranged for the burning of the Reichstag, but they blamed it on the Jews. So they came out and said, see, these people need to be eradicated from society. They're subversives. They're a problem. Joseph Stalin, who openly admired, this is pre-World War II, the invasion of Russia by 4.5 million men, Operation Barbarossa, June 22nd, 1941. It's still, almost a decade off. So, Stalin openly admired Hitler's tactics in dealing with domestic enemies. And he saw what Hitler did with the Reichstag fire. He thought that was clever. He also thought the Night of the Long Knives, which came, much later, was also clever. So Stalin, the next year, 1934, his NKVD, which is the predecessor to the KGB, same thing, basically, they engineer the assassination of the very popular Sergei Kirov, who's party secretary, I think, for Leningrad, a subordinate to Stalin. And they basically sort of let an anarchist, wander into the into the headquarters where Sergei Kirov is and shoot him. And then Stalin used it to launch a 4-year purge where millions were arrested and executed or sent to Kolyma, an area 3 times the size of France in Siberia. So this is what they were doing. They were filling up their jails. They're filling up the gulag. I think that the left, Democrats, thought they had their Kirov assassination, their Reichstag moment with January 6th. Hence the reason they've been trying to drag it out and drag it out and drag it out and say, aha, see these subversive elements in our midst. We've got to get rid of them because they're semi-fascist, quote Biden. But that's backfired because it hasn't damaged, as they hoped that it would do, Trump in the polls. So when that didn't succeed, they, have this raid on Mar-a-Lago. And they thought that Mar-a-Lago, that this again, which is designed to smear Trump, that this would move the needle. It didn't. Trump's popularity, it just continues to soar. So now they've gone to the next level, and it demonstrates their pathological terror of Trump. And I think I speak for Amie Beth when I say this. If I don't, then certainly shoot me down. But I don't think this is about Trump for you or for me. This is what they're calling MAGA is just traditional conservatism is what it is. It's Reaganism. It's Barry Goldwater. It's Edmund Burke. I mean, this goes back a long way. So what they've tried to do is to redefine it as something that is just recently sprung out of the head of Donald Trump and is a part of a cult of personality surrounding him and is fascist and needs to be destroyed. Sheer nonsense. The people who are voting for Trump are voting for him because they see him as the only figure who is speaking for them and who's strong enough to push back against the left. These are mostly middle class, often lower middle class, red state, decent Americans who simply want to be left alone. And I want to make this little distinction, Amie Beth. And we'll say this again when I come back around and we're discussing the World Economic Forum and utopians. The average person gets out of bed in the morning and thinks, I'll get a cup of coffee and think about what I'm going to do with my day. Leftists wake up in the morning and think about what you're going to do with your day too. Meaning these are individuals whose focus is on reorganizing humanity according to their own warped principles. You want to live alone. You want to be left alone, and you don't want to peek in somebody's windows and what they're doing. You want to live and let live.
Right.
That is a generally conservative mindset. It is not a leftist mindset. That's not how Biden thinks. It's not how Democrats anymore think. It's not how these leftists think. They have no respect for the rule of law. They don't have a respect for legislative bodies. They don't have a respect for the Constitution of this country. And I'm going to put out this challenge to anybody who's listening to us. I put it out on Twitter. I put it out in my article.
I saw that.
And I'll put it out on TV as well. And it is this. If you are determined to call, quote unquote, MAGA, if you're determined to call conservatives in this country fascists, I challenge you to give me a working definition of fascism that doesn't first and foremost apply to the left. I want to hear that definition. You see, because they don't offer it. What they do is it's a circular argument. You say, what is fascism? And they say, well, it's MAGA. I say, okay, all right, whatever. So what is MAGA that makes it fascist? Well, it's, and so they just go back, they say, well, it's fascist. Fascism, and we'll discuss this on a later show in more detail, but what is fascism? Is it anti-democratic? Yes. Is it racist? Yes. Does it disregard the will of the people? Yes. Does it reorganize industry, weaponize it against the people? Yes, it's all of these things. And all of this is emanating out of the left. You're not seeing this done by people on the right. It's election rigging. It's all that sort of stuff. And if there's some of you out there who think that there isn't election rigging going on, you just have your head in the sand. I mean, whether or not you buy into Dinesh D'Souza's film, 2,000 Mules, which I do. I was at Mar-a-Lago to watch the premiere of that film, and I went somewhat skeptically, not because I didn't think that there's real election rigging taking place, but I just didn't think they could prove it. And I think he did. I think he made a very compelling case. But let's just dismiss that for a second. Let's just say that didn't happen. The fact that the left, Democrats, were very involved with, and still are, meeting at the White House with big tech, that there was an organized plan to suppress dissenting voices, to kill the Hunter Biden laptop story just before the election, which demonstrated that Biden was taking money under the table through Ukraine, which is a big money laundering scam going on there. Censorship of your opponents is election rigging. That is election rigging. And we know for a fact, even the left themselves admit that they're doing that. So that is taking place. All of this is coming from the left.
So we will finish this conversation and wrap up with a couple other items. So stay tuned. We will be right back. All right, so you can imagine, in a spirit of patriotism, that I spent my weekend again watching John Wayne.
Okay, wow, that's 3 weekends in a row.
The Stagecoach.
Okay, that's the one where he twirls the rifle.
He twirls the rifle, and
his name's Ringo or something like that.
Ringo Kid, the Ringo Kid. He was in jail for a little bit. Did some things.
That's the movie that made John Wayne.
But it's the movie that made John Wayne. And so we watched it, and I would like to tell you that Chris stayed awake for the entire movie. Sometimes he takes a nap. But this one was fantastic. I liked the characters in it. I liked the story. I liked the redemption element because the girl was embarrassed of who she was. It was the showgirl, essentially the showgirl.
Nice thing about having a head injury is I can watch these movies over and over again.
Well, you should watch it again because it's fantastic.
Is it?
Yeah, there's a lot of really good elements in it. It's a little community on the Stagecoach coming together for the lady, to have her baby. And, it was a great movie. It was absolutely fantastic. I had seen it years ago, but not, I don't know. We now have a whole library on Netflix of saved John Wayne movies that we're just going to go through and click off. I didn't even know John Wayne
would be on Netflix.
I don't know if it's I don't know. He's in charge of those such things, which makes me sound like the little lady. Yeah. But he is. It's fine. I don't care. But the Stagecoach was fantastic. And I don't know, have you guys, in all of your football watching, have you seen anything good lately?
I mentioned that we'd watched that Winds of War series and War and Remembrance, which is quite lengthy, which is quite long. But I watched a couple of nights ago a fun movie that you would very much enjoy. It's called Hail the Conquering Hero, and I think the movie maybe came out in 1945, possibly 46. Okay. So it's World War II era. And it's a sweet movie. It is a funny movie. And it's a plot that so many of these old plots, you watch them and you realize, gosh, this has been remade 10 times. I mean, you watch Remember the Titans and you realize, oh yeah, that's Glory Road. That's also, and it just keeps 42 and you just, it just keeps going. This movie is about a guy who, he joins the Marine Corps. He comes from a long line of soldiers who fought for the country. And, there's this expectation that he will be like all of them. He'll be a hero. And he's rejected by the military on the basis of hay fever. That he has a severe case of hay fever. And so so what he does is he gets a job, somewhere in California or something, and sends letters home that he's in the Pacific, that he's like, wherever. And because he's too ashamed to say, aww, I had hay fever. Of all things, I was not accepted and I can't go home not having fulfilled my family, destiny. And he meets up with these battle-hardened Marines, a bunch of nice guys who are out of money, and they're in a bar somewhere, and he buys them a drink, and they start chatting, and they realize his predicament. And so they decide to take him home as one of their war buddies, meaning they take him to his own family. They say, my goodness, you can't do this to your mother. You have to go home. And we'll just tell her that you fought with us in Guadalcanal. And so they put him in uniform and they take him home. And it's one of those films where the lying just leads to bigger and bigger problems. Yeah. But the film it's very funny, and he doesn't like the plan, but they're standing in front of crowds saying, and then we saw the Japs coming over the hill. And what did he do? He steps up, picks up a machine gun, and starts mowing them all down. And he's sitting there going, oh my gosh, what am I going to do here? And so the film is sweet. It's funny. Got a little romantic element, but one of those kind of films that isn't going to, offend you.
Okay, well then we'll watch it.
Yep, you got to.
So thank you for that. And I'll make the child who's home for the weekend watch it with me. So it's perfect.
Hail the Conquering Hero.
Hail the Conquering Hero. We'll let you know. All right, so thank you very much.
Yeah,
and
we thank John for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you, John, for being with us.
And Rushemeza.
That is what he said.
Close.
Thanks, John. And you guys, we'll see you next time. Thank you for staying tuned.
Turn out the lights. The party's over. They say that all.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are grateful for the standing ovation, but there will be no encore for today's performance. Please exit the building in an orderly fashion. Thank you.
Honey, can we leave now?